Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Chaf. Yesterday we saw a machloket between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. According to Rabbi, one has to re-wash hands and feet every morning. A Kohen, even if he was there at night and he was working straight through the night, but the morning comes, that's it. That's a new day of service in the mikdash, and therefore he has to wash his hands and feet again with the kiyor. However, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, is more lenient, and he says, as long as you're there, you don't have to wash again. You come one time, and then if you're working straight through, you can even go a few days without having to wash again, as long as you don't leave and come back in. So now we have a follow-up question. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he quoted the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that Ilfa, the Amora, asked the following question. According to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who says that the laws of Lina do not apply to the washing of the hands and feet. The law of Lina applies to like sacrificial parts, that if you didn't burn them at night, then that's it, they're pasul. You cannot do anything with them in the morning. So that's the law regarding most things that are holy in the Bet HaMikdash. So how about Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Does that lina, does staying overnight, once it comes in the morning, does that make it pasul and you have to do it again? Rabbi applied lina to washing hands and feet, but not according to him, according to Rabbi Elazar, who's lenient and says that lina does not apply to the act of washing hands and feet. What about the water itself that's in the wash basin, in the kiyor? Does that become pasul? Do you have to change the water every morning? Mi amrinan hane lemai lekiddush adam v'raglaim kiddush adam v'raglaim gufayu la pasul behulina or dilma kevan dikiddush lehu bichle sharet mi pasili. Here's the two sides. Do you say that this water, what is it used for? It's used for washing hands and feet. And the act of washing hands and feet does not have the prohibition of lina. It's okay, you can wash your hands and your feet once yesterday, and it continues even to the next day. Therefore, the water also, there's no law of lina. Or do we say that although the act continues, you don't have to do it again, but the water itself was sanctified in a service vessel, and therefore, like other things that would be put in a service vessel, and then you can't leave it overnight, like blood, so too, this water becomes pasul and needs to be changed, even according to Rabbi Elazar. That is the question that they had, that Ilfa asked. So now, we're receiving all these traditions in Bavel. So they're coming in drips. And so we got one tradition from Rav Dimi, and then Ravin says, name of Rabbi Ameh. Also, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he also quoted this one. Hadar pashit ilfa ke machloket bezo, kach machloket bezo. After Ilfa asked that question, he looked into it, researched it, and he decided an answer that the machloket that applies to this also applies to that. Therefore, according to the Rabbi, for sure, who's machmir, and he says you have to wash again every morning, for sure he would say that the water becomes pasul with lina. You have to change the water too. But according to Rabbi Elazar, who's lenient and says you don't have to wash again, he is also lenient regarding the water and says that you do not have to change the water. That's the tradition that they heard. Amar lefanav Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna. Rabbi ata omer ken. However, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who cited this, right? Rabbi, is that true? Lahachi amar Rabbi Aseh amar Rabbi Yochanan. That was in the name of Rabbi Ameh, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Aseh, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, another student of Rabbi Yochanan, said, in the name of Ilfa, Mishmet Ilfa, Kiyo shelo shikiu mi ba'erev, mekadesh imenu la'avodat laila, u'machar eno mekadesh. If you have a kiyor that was not placed into the underground pit at night, we're going to see in a second that the kiyor itself, what are you going to do? An easy way is actually you could drain it out and put new water in the morning. But they didn't do that. They had a fancier mechanism in which the floor opened up, and then the whole kiyor was strung up and would be lowered down into an underground pit, aquifer, connected to the groundwater, and that way it became it was re-sanctified in that way. Now, so they would do this every night. So in fact, they would have this mechanism to renew the water every night by connecting it to basically to a mikveh or a groundwater source. Now, what if they did not do that at night? Then mekadesh menu lavodat laila. Then you can use it for the work that you did at night to wash hands and feet, but on the next day you cannot use it to wash hands and feet anymore. So this is a statement that is hard to understand. We discussed, what does he mean by that? Does he mean that on the next day you don't use it to wash hands and feet because you don't have to wash hands and feet, because you already washed his hands and feet on the night before, and that's Rabbi Elazar, that's his basic law that we saw yesterday? Or did he mean that you cannot use it even for a new person that comes in because it was left overnight? And therefore, according to that, Rabbi Elazar would say that the water has to be renewed every day. And we did not have an answer to this, and you think that you have an answer. How could it be? Because when we discussed it, also in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan didn't say, oh yes, Ilfa gave an answer. No, he didn't say that. We left it open-ended. So I'm not so sure about your tradition that you said over here that, oh yes, Ilfa had an answer, because when we learned it, and this tradition from Rabbi Aseh, there was no answer. All right, so now we're still not sure if there is an answer, so we're going to try to resolve it from a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma. Tashema ben katin asa shenem asar dad lakiyor, afu asa muchani lakiyor shelo yumemav nifsalin balina. Mishnah Masechet Yoma teaches that a Kohen Gadol named Ben Katin made 12 spigots for the washing basin, so that 12 different Kohanim can all wash their hands and feet at once. That's very nice. He made this nice luxury kiyor, and he also made a muchani, means a mechanism, in order that the kiyor would be lower down, where it had chain on top, and you had a pulley system, and then you would lower it down into the ground so that the water in the kiyor would touch the groundwater, and that way it would be koshered every night, so that the water that's in the kiyor would not become pasul by being left overnight. So we see clearly that the author of this Mishnah, whoever it is, thinks that the water in the kiyor is prohibited by lina. Now we have to figure out who is the author. My love, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, he isn't the author of this Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and if it is, then we can answer Ilfa's question above, that although Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon thinks that a Kohen, who washed his hands and feet on the previous day, need not rewash it on the next day, as long as he remained in the mikdash, so he can go a few days and stay there without rewashing. So the act of washing hands and feet does not become pasul belina. He could just keep going. However, if Rabbi Elazar is the author of this Mishnah, then that leniency does not apply to the water itself, because the water itself is in a holy vessel, and therefore needs to be cleansed every morning. Either empty it out or fill it up, or using this mechanism, lower it down so that it connects with the groundwater. So isn't that true? And therefore we can conclude that Rabbi Elazar is stringent when it comes to the water. We say no, not necessarily. Lo Rabbihi. It could be that the author of this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and we already know Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is stringent even regarding the act of the Kohen washing his hands and feet. He has to do it again every morning, and certainly the water itself would have to be changed every morning. So therefore, this is no proof for Rabbi Elazar. No, but this Mishnah cannot be has to be Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, because the Resha before this is Rabbi Elazar. Therefore, this section, the Sefa, must also be Elazar. What is the Resha? Tekatani Resha. Balo esel paro. Ufar haya omed ben ha'ulam ve'lamizbeach, rosho ladarom ve'fanav ufanav lema'arav. והכהן עומד במזרח ופניו למערב. מן שמת דאמר בין העולם למזבח צפון, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon he. The Mishnah teaches that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen would take the pad, his pad, that's going to be a pad chatat for him, and he brings it to the area in the northern part of north of the Mizbeach. And so he brings it between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So you have the Mizbeach here, and you have the Ulam, the inside sanctuary, over here, steps going up. And so he would bring the pad in between these two sections, and the pod would have to be facing south. So that's this way south, towards the back of this picture. And it turns its head towards the west. West means towards the Kodesh. So that's how you have it here. It's facing away from us, but it's turned right toward the Kodesh. And the Kohen himself is standing next to its head, and he is facing west. And he puts his hands on it and does semichant and says vidui on that pod. Now, why is it over here in this section? Well, we'll see. But it has to be put in a section where it can be slaughtered in that section, because he's gonna slaughter it right there. Now, who says that Ben Ha'olam V'Lamizbech is Safon? This chatat has to be slaughtered in the north section. Well, the north section, we're going to see there's three opinions about what the north section is. And who says that this area that's between the Mizbeach and the Ulam is called Safon? Well, it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. That's what he thinks, as we're about to see. The Tanya, Ezu Safon. There's a braita that says, what is called the north of the Mizbeach? Mikir Mizbeach Sefoni v'ad Kotel Azara Sefoni. Chuneged kol Mizbeach kolo Safon divrei Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. The first opinion, which is the most stringent, most limited opinion, says that is from the northern wall until the northern wall of the courtyard, until the northern wall of the Mizbeach, or the other way around. It's from the northern wall of the Mizbeach until the northern wall of the courtyard, and it's as wide as the Mizbeach itself. Here's a picture. So the first opinion of Rabbi Yosef says, here's the northern wall of the Mizbeach, and there's the northern wall of the courtyard, and so this area that is limited by the width of the Mizbeach, that's it. So it has to be slaughtered there. Everybody agrees that's the standard place. That's definitely directly north of the Mizbeach. That's the most stringent opinion. Then we're going to see the next opinion is Rabbi Elazar, who says not only this part, he adds also Ben Ha'olam la Mizbeach, between the entrance hall and the Mizbeach, this whole area. And that's what the Mishnah, the Resha of the Mishnah says, that the Kohen brings the pot over here. That's why we say the Mishnah must be the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is even more lenient, and he says not only the middle part and the western part, even the eastern part over here is still north, even though it's not within the boundary of the width of the Mizbeach, but just like you can extend it westward, you can also extend it eastward, and you can even bring the pod and slaughter the pod over here. Okay, so let's see the rest of the baraita inside. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Mosif Af Ben Ha'olam V'Lamizbeach. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon adds also the western part that's between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. Rabbi Mosif Af Mekom Dirisat Regla Kohanim Mekom Dirisat Regla Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi adds also the place where Kohanim can walk and where Yisrael can walk. Yisrael can go in that first 11 amot right over here next to where you come into the courtyard, that first 11, and then the Kohanim can go also the next 11, but Yisrael can't. And so that area where they walk is also included in the north. But from the chamber of knives and inward, everybody agrees is not good. That would be over here. If you go on the side, on the side of the ulam, you can't see it in this picture, but if you go, there's a chamber of knives that would be within this area, and then the courtyard that's outside of that, that goes all the way to the west, then to the end of it. That, although it is northward of the altar, but that's way beyond the boundary, and so everybody agrees that is not included. And so therefore, we see that the opinion that says the area between the mizbech and the ulam, that's north, well, that is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. And so therefore, since the Resha that mentions that the Kohen brings the pot there, is Rabbi Elazar, so to the Sefa must also be Rabbi Elazar, and the Sefa says that they would put the kiyod and kosher it every morning, and therefore, it must be according to Rabbi Elazar, the water in the kiyod is subject to lina. Isn't that a good proof? Wait a second, you're telling me that the Resha is only the Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon and not the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Hashta Rabbi Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Mosif Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon La Mosif? Are you telling me that Rabbi is adding more space compared to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and he doesn't add to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon? He does add. In fact, he adds even more, right? And includes that he's adding not only this, but also this, and not only that, but also the eastern part. So therefore, the Resh actually could be the B. And according to the B, not only in this part, but you could have it in the western section or the eastern section. So the Resha could be the B. So we reword our answer. Anan hachi ka'amrinan. Isa kadatech rebihi lukma b'makom derisat regle kohanim makom derisat regle Israel. We meant as if the Resha is a Yehuda Nasi, then why not put it here, farther away? I mean, it's not so respectful to bring an animal all the way so close to the Kodesh, to the Hechal. So you'd do it farther away if it was a B. And the fact that we don't put it out over here where the Kohanim and Yisrael can walk, that makes it sound like the Resha is not the B. Elamai, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so now what do you want to say? That's Rabbi Elazar. Lukma mikir mizbeach sefoni ad kotel azara sefoni. If so, and you want to keep it away from the Kodesh, you're saying it's not respectful, well then, put it in this section, so that's farther away. Why would you put it all the way as close as possible to the Kodesh? Ela maitlach lememad, mishum chushat Kohen Gadol, hachaname mishum chushat Kohen Gadol. Rather, you'd have to answer that for the Rabbi Elazar, the reason why it's placed near the Kodesh is because the Kohen Gadol is weak. You remember, he's staying up all night, and he's fasting, and he has to do all of the avodot on Yom Kippur, so he's very weak. So we want to minimize the amount that he has to walk. If he would have to do shechita over here, then he would have to catch the blood there and walk the blood over, and it's farther to walk. It's not that much farther, it's only a few feet, but still we want to minimize as much as possible his walking. And that's why, according to Rabbi Elazar, we don't do it in this middle section, but rather in the western section. Once you say that, then you can say the same thing for the B, and therefore this Mishnah could be the B, and the B would say, yes, certainly it could be in the eastern section, but we want to minimize his walking because he's weak, and therefore we put it over here. And therefore, the Resha could be the B, and since the Resha could be the B, the Sefa also could be the B. And so the B certainly would say you have to kosher the kiyod every morning, and therefore there is no proof from this Mishnah to the answer of Ilfa's question, and so we leave it unanswered whether, according to the Rabbi Elazar, would he say that the water is pasul belina or is it not? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kidesh yadav raglav litrumat hadeshen, lemachar eno sarich lekadesh, shekevar kidesh metechilat avodah. Rabbi Yochanan has a halachic ruling that if a Kohen washed his hands and feet for the removal of the ashes, that's the first thing that's done in the morning, even before sunrise, even before dawn, right when the rooster crows. The first thing that was done in the Bet HaMikdash is that a Kohen would go up the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach and would remove some of the ashes and bring it down and put it on the side. Now, if he washed his hands and feet in order to do that, then, when the rest of the morning comes, when sunrise comes, he does not have to wash his hands and feet again, even though technically he did the Trumat Hadeshin while it was still night, it was still dark at the end of the night. But since we call that, he already washed his hands for the beginning of the Avodah. That's the introduction to the next day's services, and therefore he doesn't have to wash again. We ask, Liman, Rabbi Yochanan, who is he following the halacha like? Is it Rabbi or like Rabbi Elazar? Let's see. Ila Rabbi Hamar Paslalina. It can't be Rabbi because Rabbi said that the act of washing becomes pasul overnight. And he washed his hands and feet at night, and now it's the morning, so he should have to do it again. And Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, as long as he remains in the Mikdash, he does not have to wash his hands and feet again, not even 10 days later, as long as he stays there. And so certainly, just for a few minutes that he was there, from the nighttime till the daytime, he should not have to. So who are we following? Amar Abaye le'olam l'Rabbi, ve'linad Rabbanan hi umoded mikerot hageber ad safra la pastalina. Abaye says actually it is Rabbi. And in fact, if you did it the day before, then you have to do it the next morning. But since the whole law of lina for washing hands and feet is only midrabanan, so the rabbis were lenient and they agreed that from the time of the rooster crowing until the morning, that's not so much time. The rooster crowing, it's already like a little bit morning, and therefore the rabbis did not make a drabanan ruling to prohibit washing in hands and feet from that short time from the crowing. So really, if you did it the day before, then you have to do it again next morning. But from the time of the rooster crows, he says it's okay, and therefore he does not have to wash again. That's Abaye. Rava amar leolam Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon hi, v'ra'a Rabbi Yochanan devarav b'tchilat avoda v'lo b'sof avoda. Rava says no. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan is following the ruling of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and he, Rabbi Yochanan, agreed with Rabbi Elazar, but only partially. He agreed with Rabbi Elazar regarding the beginning of avoda, as long as he washed his hands and feet for the coming day's service, although it was still nighttime, but he's getting ready for Trumat Hadeshin, which is the beginning of the next day. So in that case, he agreed with Rabbi Elazar that he can just keep going, he doesn't have to do it again. However, if let's say he came late in the night, and he washed his hands and his feet in order to do something that was for the end of the previous day's service. In that case, he would not agree with Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Yochanan charted his own path, and this particular halacha, he said, well, you started the morning one? Okay, then I can follow Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon for that case. Metibe. Now we have a challenge against Rabbi Yochanan. Ra'u echav hakohanim sheyarad, vehem rasu uba'u, miharu v'kiddeshu yedehem v'raglehem min hakiyor. The Mishnah in Masechet Tamid says that after the first Kohen does Trumat Hadeshin, his brethren, the other Kohanim that are from the same clan that are working on that day, they would see that now he came down from the Mizbeach with the ashes. So he did that first thing. Now they can go and do the next thing. Now, but they have to go and run and come and wash their hands and feet from the Kiyor so that they can go on, and they go up there and they clean up the top of the Mizbeach. Now, why are they washing their hands and their feet? We're assuming that they had been there before and that they were already there during the night doing some other things. So why do they have to wash their hands and feet again? Rabbi Yochanan just said that if they were there before, well, let's see. Bishlam al Abaye, de mokim la kerebi, umode rebi de mikerot hageber al tzafra la pasla lina, hamane rebihi. So this Mishnah makes sense according to Abaye's interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan, because according to him, we follow halacha like Rabbi. Rabbi Abaye interprets Rabbi Yochanan to be following Rabbi. And Rabbi agrees it's only that from the time of the rooster crowing until the morning, then la paslalina, then it's okay. So that's why the first Kohen, who he washed his hands and feet just before the rooster, right when the rooster crowed, so that's okay. He doesn't have to do it again. But the other Kohanim who had been there from beforehand, and they washed their hands and feet from beforehand, well then certainly they would have to go and do it again. So then this is Rabbi is stringent, and that's his basic law, that there is lina, so they have to do it again. So this makes sense according to Abaye, who interprets Rabbi Yochanan as following Rabbi. Ela l'Rava mokim la Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, aval l'Rabbi mikrot hageber atzafra pasalina hamane. Rabbi paslalina. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon ha'amar afilu mikan v'ad asara yamim eno sarich lekadesh. But according to Rava, who said that Rabbi Yochanan is following the ruling of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon for this case, since the Kohen Gadol is starting the beginning service to Matadish for the next day, so we consider it as if it's continuing, and even though he did it before dawn, he washed his hands before dawn, still we can let him continue. if Rabbi Yochanan is following Rabbi Elazar's ruling. And that would mean that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you follow the Rabbi, then he would certainly have to wash his hands again, because that's why he's saying that this Mishnah is only, that Rabbi Yochanan is only following Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yochanan is not following Rabbi, because Rabbi would say that even for that short time, from the rooster crowing until morning, then it would become the pasul, and he would have to wash his hands again. So we're not following Rabbi. Okay, so with that assumption, this Mishnah that says the next round of Kohanim would watch when he's coming down, and they would quickly go and wash their hands and feet, and all this is still before sunrise. It's still right, even before dawn. It's still right at dawn. Hamaneh. So who would be the author of this Mishnah? Idabi paslalina. If it's a biuda nasi, well, then it won't even help, because the first Kohen to Matadeshin, he came down. Okay, good. And then the other Kohanim, they're going to wash their hands and feet right then. But then dawn's going to come, and then it won't work, because they're going to have to wash again. So according to the B, if this Mishnah was a B, then that would mean that you can't continue anything, not from before dawn to after dawn. And so even for that small amount of time, they washed their hands and feet. Now you're going to go do something. Oh, dawn came, you're going to have to wash their feet again. So it doesn't work. Rather, it must be to be Elazar to be Shimon, but that can't be either, because he said that they don't have to wash their hands at all again. Because if they were there before, and right now we're assuming still that the other brethren Kohanim were there from beforehand, and they washed their hands and feet the previous day or 2 days before, and that's no problem. Could it be for to be Elazar? Because he says even 10 days, as long as they're staying there, they don't have to wash their hands and feet. So this Mishnah that says they wash their hands and feet right then before dawn, who does that help? According to the B, it won't help, because it'll be cancelled in a few minutes. And according to the B Shimon, they don't have to wash their hands and feet at all. No, in fact, it's talking about it's opinion of Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Shimon, and it's not Kohanim that had been there before, but new Kohanim. They just arrived. They came for the morning shift. They just arrived, so that's why they have to wash their hands and feet according to everybody. And then once they wash their hands and feet, even though it's early and even before dawn, that's it. Then that'll be good for the day, and even for as long as they are there. And so therefore we reconciled the both interpretations of Rabbi Yochanan, both according to Abaye and also according to Rava. A question arose: if a Kohen was in the Mikdash, he washes hands and feet, he's in there, he's good, he's doing services, and he leaves and then comes back. Does he have to wash his hands and feet again? Does leaving, let's say he just leaves for a second, he walks right out and then comes back in, is that effective in requiring Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim again? אם תמצא לומר לינה לה פסלה דלה פריש, אבל יציאה דפריש, אסוכם מסך דעתה, או דימה כיוון דבידו לחזור למסך. Even if you say that staying overnight, it will not make him pasul, even if we follow the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, because he never left. So he's there. He was there the day before. He's there all night. He's there the next day. He doesn't have to wash his hands and feet again. Even if you would say that, that's because he remained in the Bet HaMikdash, and so he's concentrating on Bet HaMikdash things while he's there. But if he leaves, so now he's distracted. Once you leave, then you start thinking about other things, and therefore you would have to wash his hands and feet again when he comes back in. Or do we say, no, since it's in his power to come back in, he's not going to be distracted. He went out for a second to whatever, to get something, to do something, and now he's coming back in, but he's still keeping it in mind. He's still keeping his hands clean. He's not going to touch anything that will make them tameh, and so he doesn't have to wash his hands and feet again. So let's try to answer this. Tashema. Kidesh yadav v'raglav nitmeu matbilan ve'en tzarich lekadesh. Yasu harehen b'kedushatan. A Braita teaches that if a Kohen washes hands and feet and they became tameh, we're talking about not tumah that would be his whole body, deoraita, but rather he touched something that would make him tameh only midirabanan, like if he touched a holy scriptures, a scroll of a Tanakh. And so that makes his hands tameh. In that case, he need only dip them into a mikveh. That's enough. And he doesn't have to wash them again with the kiyod and do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. That's case one. If he left, however, this is the one important for us, then haren b'kedushatan, they remain in their sanctity. So doesn't that mean that he can go and come back and does not have to rewash them? Yatsu yadav la kami ba'yalan. Ki kami ba'yalan yasa kol gufo mai. And so we say, no, this is not a proof, because this yatsu, maybe it only means that he stuck his hands outside of the temple courtyard. Not that he walked out, yatsu. So if his hands went out, we're not asking about that question if his hands went out. Rather, we want to know if his whole body went out. So at least we do learn something, that if he washes his hands and feet inside and he sticks his hand out, maybe he sticks his hand out to reach for something, to get something from someone, then since he's still inside, he doesn't have to wash his hands and feet again. That sounds like, in fact, what it's talking about, because it says Kidesh Yadav Raglav, and they became Tameh. So then Yatsu is also they, not him, Yatsa, but plural. So it means his hands and feet left. So then they remain. Okay, good. So that's we resolved that little problem, but we didn't answer the main question we have, which is if his whole entire body goes out and then comes back in. Tashema, shelo rechutz yadayim v'raglayim mekadesh bichli sharet mibifnim. Kidesh bichle sharet bachutz, or bichli chol bifnim, or shetavar b'meh me'ara ve'abad, abod hato pesula. A Braita teaches that if someone, a Kohen, his hands and feet were not washed, then mekadesh, he has to wash them with a kli sharet, and inside. I mean, he has to use a holy vessel, like the kior, and he has to do it in the Temple Mount. That's where you have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. If he used a temple vessel, but he did it outside, no good. Or he used a regular, non-holy vessel, even though it was inside. He took just some bowl from his house, and he poured water on his hands and feet, no good. Or even if he went to a mikveh, meh me'ara, cave water is one example of a mikveh. It rains and the water pools up inside a cave. That would be often used for a mikveh. And he went and served. Then that service is pasul, because all of these permutations are no good, even though a mikveh is very important. Mikveh is for tahara, but there's a separate act besides going to a mikveh. There's kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So we learn it has to be done inside, and it has to be done with a klei sharet. Ta'amad kidesh b'klei sharet b'chutz, ha-kidesh b'fnim v'yasa avodato keshera. Now we can derive from this baraita, since it says that if he used klei sharet and it was outside, then it's no good. It sounds like it's no good only because he started off outside and did kiddush yadayim v'raglayim outside. But let's say he was inside and did it properly and used kileh sharet inside and washed, and now he's good, and he left, then that would be okay. Because if that was not okay, then the Braita should have taught us a bigger chidush and said that, if he did it inside and left and then came back, it's no good. He has to do it again. It should have taught us that. So isn't that a proof that it's okay, as long as if he did it inside properly and went out and came back, then he doesn't have to do it again. No, Dilma Kidesh Bichle Sharet Bachutz Hechidame, Kegonda Pik Yadav Lebar Vikidesh. No, maybe the case of where he sanctified with a holy vessel outside wasn't talking about a case where his whole body was outside, but rather his body was inside, and he stuck his hands and feet out of the courtyard and then used the Klei Sharet on the outside. That's the case where it's not good. Therefore, the only thing we could learn from here is hakidesh mibifnim beyasa dapek yadei lebar keshera. If he washed his hands and feet inside properly and he stuck his hands and feet out and then brought him back in, that's kosher. That's all you could derive from here, which we know already. But we want to know, what if his whole body went outside? So we still have no answer. אמר לרב זביד לרב פאפא, תשמע, יעשה חוץ ממחיצת חומת העזרה, אם לשהות טעון טבילה, אם לפי שעה, טעון קידוש ידיים ורגליים. So maybe we can learn from this baraita, says Rav Zevid to Rav Papa. If someone goes out of the wall of the temple courtyard, if he stays there for a while, then he has to do tevilah again. This is tevilah, because we're afraid that he became tameh. He was not being careful, and he maybe touched something that's tameh, so his whole body. So if he stayed out there for a long time, then he has to do tevilah. If it's for a short time, then he has to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim again. So therefore, you see, even if you go for a short time, you have to wash your hands and feet again. This seems like a pretty good proof. And he says, no, when it says here that he goes out for a short time, it means he went to relieve himself, to go either number one or number two. Sech raglav, to cover his legs, that's a euphemism for number two. Latil mayim is to urinate. That's why he has to come back and he has to wash his hands and feet again. But if he went out and didn't do anything and came back, then maybe he would not have to wash his hands and feet again. So, okay, we are at least answering part of the problem, part of the question. At least we do know now that if he goes out and goes to the bathroom, then he will have to wash again. We say, no, this is not a good interpretation of that baraita, that he went to go to the bathroom, because we have a Mishnah that teaches us that explicitly. So we don't need a baraita to teach us that. Here's the Mishnah in Masechet Yoma that says, anyone who covers his legs, means goes number two, he has to do tevilah, he goes mikveh. And anyone who goes out to urinate, he has to wash his hands and feet again. So we already know that. So why would we need another braita to teach us that? And the answer is Taneh v'Hadar mefaresh. The Tana teaches it and then he explains it further. A lot of times you have a Mishnah that teaches the basic principle and then a braita that expands on it. So now you don't say every braita is unique and it teaches something new. It's just explaining what the Mishnah says. So there's no proof from there. Tashema para. רבי חייא בר יוסף אמר, מקדש בכלי שרת בפנים ויוצא. ורבי יוחנן אמר, אפילו בחוץ ואפילו בכלי חול ואפילו כעדה של חרס. Regarding פרה אדומה, the Kohen is going to be processing the פרה אדומה. He has to wash his hands and feet. Now, machloket, where? Rabbi חייא bar Yosef says he washes his hands and feet inside the Temple Mount, and then he leaves and goes to Harabayit, because that's in Harabayit. That's where they're going to slaughter and burn the parah adumah and sprinkle it from there. So even though the service is done outside, still he has to first go inside and then go outside in order to do the rest of the parah adumah. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he can wash his hands and feet even outside, even using a regular non-sacred vessel, even with an earthenware bowl, because this avodah is all done outside. And therefore, everything, it's not a regular kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for a korban, because the parah adumah is essentially not a korban. Anyway, what we see here is that, according to the first opinion of Rabbi Chiya, it is actually kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that he has to do. So he has to do it inside. And even though he leaves, still okay. It goes with him over there, and it remains kiddush yadayim v'raglayim even outside of the courtyard. So certainly, if he goes back in, you wouldn't have to do it again. Isn't that a good proof? Amar Papa Shane Para Ho'il B'chol Ma'aseh B'chutz La Pasla Ba'Yetzi'ah. No, Papa says Para Adumah is different. Since all of the services are done outside, the slaughtering, the burning is all done outside, in that case it's special that although he has to wash his hands inside, but going outside does not make it pasul. That's a special law for parah adumah. But for any other regular korban, if he leaves and comes back, maybe indeed he has to wash his hands again. Yachi, lama li de mekadesh. Well, if so, that since everything is done outside, so we have the special law, why does he have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim at all? Why not say, just like he does all the services outside the mikdash, say that he shouldn't have to wash his hands and feet either inside the mikdash, which is actually what Rabbi Yochanan said. Why would you have to wash your hands and feet inside? And then at all, since everything is done outside, so why not be able to wash your hands and feet outside? And the answer is Kain avodat penim, because we make the services similar to a service, the avodah that's done inside the Bet HaMikdash. So just like inside the Bet HaMikdash, for a regular korban, you're going to have to wash your hands and feet inside. So the parah adumah, although the parah adumah is very different, it's really not a korban, but it's similar to a korban. You're doing many things that are like a korban. So then, as much as we can, we try to make it similar. And that's why Rabbi Chiya said, okay, wash your hands and feet inside, but then obviously you have to go out to do the rest of it there. But this is parah adumah, that's an exception, and you cannot learn anything from here for a regular case, and so we actually leave this open-ended. if someone does Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglayim inside, and they're good to go, and then they leave just for a moment and then come back, do they have to wash their hands and feet again? We're not sure. What we do know is that if they just stick their hands and feet out, then they don't have to do it again. If they leave and they go to the bathroom, then they will have to wash their hands and feet again. Next, we have one last question. If a Kohen went and sanctified his hands and his feet, he washed them, and he's in the mikdash, he's serving, and he becomes tameh. We're talking about deoraita tuma over his whole body, so he can go to the mikveh, and then he'll be tahor again. The question is, does he have to wash his hands and feet again? Or does the washing the hands and feet they did beforehand continue? So is tumah going to be an interruption to the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Imtim selomar yisi'a la pasla degabra hazeh, avalacha degabra la hazeh asuche masach da'ateh. Or dilma kevan da'adar hazi dakle v'la masach da'ateh. Here's the two sides of the question. Even if you will say that if he goes out and comes back in, he's not pasul, that's because the person himself is still qualified. He went out for a short time, and he came back in, and so he's still concentrating and making sure his hands and feet are still going to be sanctified, and so he doesn't have to wash again. Even if you say that, that's the case because the person remains permitted and fit to serve. However, in this case where he's tameh, so now, since he cannot serve in the mikdash while tameh, so he's not going to remain concentrating on his hands. He's going to get distracted, and therefore he would have to wash his hands and feet again. That's one side. Or do we say that since he can come back after he becomes pure, he goes to the mikveh, he waits till it gets nighttime, and then he'll be able to come back, so maybe he will not be distracted, and he'll concentrate and make sure his hands and feet will remain pure. Tashema, Kiddush Yadav Raglav Nitmeu Matbilan, Ve'en Sarich LeKadesh. Here's a braita that seems to answer the question directly. It says, if a Kohen washed his hands and feet, and then they became tameh, then he can dip them in the mikveh, and he does not need to wash them again in the kiyor. So this is talking about D'Rabbanan Tum'ah, that only his hands became tameh, like if he touched a Torah scroll. So then he just dips them in the mikveh, he doesn't have to wash them again with the kiyor. Nitmeu yadav lami ba'yalan, kima ba'yalan nitma kol gufo. So we say this does not answer our question because we're not asking if his hands became tameh, but rather what if his whole body became tameh. Kol gufo tepukli kevan de'elim abad ha'arev shemesh asuche masach da'ateh. All right, so we have a logical answer. His whole body, we can figure out the answer to that because he's going to have to go to the mikveh and wait till it gets dark. So that's a long time. He goes to the mikveh, I don't know, sometime in the middle of the day. It's going to be several hours till it gets dark, and then he'll be able to be fit again to be totally tahor, to come back to the mikdash. That's a long time, so surely he will get distracted, and so that therefore he should have to wash again. And the answer, no. Well, let's say it's a case where he became tameh just a few minutes before sunset. And therefore, so he went to the mikdash, he washed his hands and his feet. He's doing things. He becomes tameh 5 minutes before shiki'ah. Okay, hurries up, he goes into the mikveh. He'll just have to wait 4 more minutes, and then he can come back in. And so in a case like that, he won't be distracted. So maybe that's okay. Not 4 minutes. He has to wait till it gets dark. Okay, whatever, half hour. It won't be a long time. So what about in that case? Tashema para. Rabbi Chia b'Rabbi Yosef amar mekadesh b'chli sharet b'fnim v'yoseh. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu b'chutz v'afilu b'chli chol v'afilu b'mkeda shel hayres. Now we bring the machloket that we had before to try to answer this question regarding para aduma. Rabbi Chia b'Rabbi Yosef says that the Kohen who is performing, doing the service of the paraduma, he has to go into the mikdash, he has to sanctify his hands and his feet with the klei sharet, with the kiyor inside, and then he can go out to Har HaZetim and go do the paraduma over there. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, this is not a korban. The whole service is done outside. Therefore, yes, he has to wash his hands and feet, but he could do that outside. He could do that with a regular vessel. He could do that with an earthenware bowl. V'ha para דתמויה מטמינן לדתנן, מטמאין היו כהן, השורף את הפרה מטבילין אותו, לא עושים מליבן של סדוקין, שהיו אומרים במעורבי שמש היה נעשית, שמאמינה לה פסלה בטומאה. Now, regarding para aduma, here's what they used to do. They used to take a kohen who was 100% tahor, and they would bring him to Har HaZitim, and they would make him tameh on purpose, as we learn in Masechet Para. That the elders would go take a dead mouse or something and have the kohen who's going to slaughter or burn the para aduma, and they would make him touch this dead mouse. He was tahor. He could have done it like that. No, they would make him tameh, the one who's going to burn the para, and then he would go to the mikveh, and then he would go burn it before it got dark, when he's tivul yom. Why they do this? Because this was a very hot button issue between the rabbis and the Sadducees. The rabbis/Pharisees said that a tivul yom can do the para aduma, and the Saddukim said no, tivul yom cannot do it, but rather it has to be b'me'ura v'shemesh. So they would go and do this whole thing on purpose in order to counter the view of the Saddukim. And they could have just left him totally tahor, and everybody would have been okay with it, but they wanted to teach people a lesson that the Saddukim are wrong. So therefore, they purposely made this in-between case so that he would be tivul yom and do it to counteract the view of the Saddukim, who said that only someone who the sun went down and it got dark could do the para aduma. So here's exactly our case. We have someone, and he went according to, if we follow the bichia, he went to the temple courtyard, and he went to the kiyor. He washed his hands and his feet, and now he comes to Har HaZitim, and they make him tameh. And then he goes to the mikveh. He doesn't go back to the mikdash to wash his hands and feet again. So we can learn from here that washing hands and feet, you do it once, that's good enough, even if you become tameh. And you have to go to the mikveh. And then, in this case, actually, he doesn't wait till it gets dark, but he does it right then and there. And so he doesn't have to wash his hands again. So isn't this a good proof that you don't have to wash your hands again after becoming tameh? So therefore we can learn Shema. Now we can conclude that becoming tameh does not cancel the washing of hands and feet. But we say, no, this is not a good proof. Shane para, tivul yom la pasil ba. Para aduma is different because a tivul yom can do it, whereas other korbanot, it's not true. And for other korbanot, a tivul yom cannot do the Kabbalah and Zirika, and so therefore you can't learn from para aduma to other korbanot. Yachi lamali dimkadesh. If para aduma is so different that even the tivul yom can do it, so why is he washing his hands and feet at all? As we answered before, even though para aduma is not technically a korban, still we want to make it like a korban. And therefore we tell him, okay, go wash your hands and feet in the kiyor, and then come out over here and do the rest, so that it'll be similar to it, but it's similar, but it's not really a korban, and therefore we cannot answer the question based on this source. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.